Okay, now part two. The first resurrection realization. The resurrection of Jesus was one thing, but getting people to believe in the resurrection is totally another thing. And Jesus' task upon rising from the dead was to get his followers to believe that it actually happened. This was no easy task. It still isn't today. And we're about to see for the first time the resurrection realized. Peter and this unnamed disciple ran to the gravesite. The young man outran Peter but stopped at the entrance. Peter jumped in. Verse 8. Then went in also that other disciple which came first to the sepulchre, and he saw and believed. He saw and believed. For as yet they knew not the scripture that he must rise from the dead. The other disciple believed at that point that Jesus rose from the dead. He's the first one who had a resurrection realization. Now note, he is not the first one to actually see the resurrected Christ. He's just the first one to believe that Jesus actually rose from the dead. Now the other guy believed. Peter still didn't get it. Peter didn't get it. Of all people, he should. How many times had Jesus said that he was going to rise from the dead? Multiple times. But just like you, this other guy believed in the resurrection, having never seen the resurrected Christ. Don't be so hard on yourself if you don't see the deliverance you seek right now. Just keep moving until you figure out how to see it, believe it, and to receive it. God's patient. Be patient with yourself too. You'll get there. The young, speedy man is the first person to realize there had been a resurrection. Now the first resurrection appearance. As Peter and the other guy leave, Mary Magdalene shows up a second time. Remember, she had gone with a bunch of ladies? This time she's alone at the sepulcher and she's in tears. John 20, verse 10. Then the disciples went away again unto their own home. But Mary stood without the sepulchre weeping, and as she wept, she stooped down and looked into the sepulchre. Now Mary Magdalene loved Jesus, but couldn't figure out in her mind what was going on. Again, it was a lot to take in. Verse 12. And seeing two angels in white sitting, one at the head and the other at the feet, where the body of Jesus had lain. Now how many angels are there? Two. It doesn't say they were glowing, it just says they were wearing white. And they were sitting at both ends of the wrappings. I don't know if it was sideways or lengthwise. I don't know. I have no idea. But there was one man sitting to each side dressed in white. 13. And they say to her, Woman, why weepest thou? And she saith unto them, Because they've taken away my Lord, and I know not where they've laid him. Now, who's she talking to? Now I thought it was interesting. Did they just speak the same thing at the same time? It says they said. So it's like stereo. And she's talking to what she knows to be angels. The first angel had already told her that Jesus was risen from the dead, and now she's asking him where they've taken the body. Was she listening? No. Sometimes when things are really going on in your life, it's hard to really concentrate. And she asked, Where'd you take the body? He's risen. No, but where'd you take him? He's risen. No, but where'd you guys put him? I love her spunk and I marvel at her thick-headedness. So human. Now what happens next would be great to see in a Hollywood scene. It's funny that the angels could see the risen Christ standing just behind Mary. But she didn't have a clue. They're looking out past her and they could see him standing right behind her. How fun would that have been? And when she had thus said, she turned herself back. She turned around and saw Jesus standing. and knew not that it was Jesus. And Jesus saith unto her, Woman, why weepest thou? Whom seekest thou? Who are you looking for? And she, supposing him to be the gardener, saith unto him, Sir, if you've borne him hence, tell me where thou hast laid him, and I'll take him away. Now who did she just ask? It's got to be crazy stuff. So she's looking in to the tomb, and the two guys are just sitting there, dressed in white. And they just happen to be two angels casually sitting there next to the wrappings, maybe legs crossed, looking at their iPhones, white of course. And she turns around, and there's a man standing right behind her. You ever turn around and somebody's right there? It's like, whoa, where'd you come from? And she's like, what? Now maybe he was backlit. I don't know. Maybe she couldn't see clearly because of the tears. Or maybe he looked a little bit different because the last time she saw him, he was not a pretty sight. Remember, he was beat beyond recognition. Maybe he had on a cowboy hat and was holding a rake. You know, I don't know. Whatever the reason, she didn't recognize him. You know, I wonder if some of those times that you said that you saw an angel or were helped by an angel, I wonder if it was actually the risen Christ just having a little bit of fun. It's possible. It's absolutely possible. Verse 10 of John 20. Jesus saith unto her, Mary. And she turned herself and said unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, master or teacher. Now, what would that have been like when she realized who was actually standing there? Talk about drama. You think her heart sped up? You think adrenaline shot through her? Oh my word! When Jesus said her name, he said it like only he said her name. Like you have a pet name for somebody, or you say it a certain way. You know, and it clicked for her. Mary, Mary, Mary. You know, however he said it, Mary. You know, I don't know. This is where the TV would cut to commercial. Right there. Mary was the first person on earth to see the resurrected Christ. Mark 16:9 says that he appeared first to Mary Magdalene, out of whom he had cast 7 devils. This girl had once been a hot mess. He changed her life totally. I guess really her believing in him changed her life totally, even before he raised from the dead. She must have been a very special person in Jesus' life for her to have been the very first person on earth to see him in his resurrected body. It wasn't his mother. Wasn't his brothers. Wasn't Peter. Wasn't the apostles. It was Mary Magdalene, a woman he had cast 7 devil spirits out of. You think she loved him? You think he loved her? She stuck with this guy. She walked with him those 70 miles from Galilee to Jerusalem, knowing he was walking to his death. That was the first resurrection appearance and the second resurrection realization. Now, the second appearance on Sunday, Jesus then surprised a few women as they too were heading to tell the disciples what Mary saw. And Jesus greeted them by saying, all hail, and it's better translated, cheers, ladies. That's what all hail means. Be happy. You know, imagine Jesus just popping out of nowhere, arms out, a great big smile, and saying, cheers. You think he was having fun in that new body? Oh, probably scared the pee willy out of those women, though. You think driving a new car is fun? Imagine how fun it's going to be when you get to test drive your new body that's going to be similar to the one that he was in. Oh my gosh. I'm sure Jesus was having a blast seeing what this new body could do. watch this, God. That group of, I bet the angels were having a kick watching Jesus get used to that spiritual body. That had to be a fun day. And that group of ladies that he knew so well then kneeled down and they grabbed his legs and his feet. Matthew 28, 9 through 10 says that. They all wanted to hold him. Wouldn't you? Wouldn't you have wanted to grab onto him, hug him, shake his hand, whatever? See, that was a second appearance. Then the third, resurrection realization. Now the guards get bribed. About that same time, a couple of the guards, not all of them, who had seen that angel and passed out, they went to the top religious leaders, not the Roman leaders, and they told them what happened. And those religious leaders took a huge bribe from the temple treasury. And they gave it to these guys and they said, you lie, and you say that you fell asleep and his disciples came and stole that body. Well, they taken the money. Hey, it's just business. It's just business. So now the third appearance and the fourth resurrection realization. Now Peter revisits the tomb alone. He's not with that young guy anymore. And this is his second visit. And he saw the risen Christ at that time. You'll have to look at Luke 24:12 or 1 Corinthians 15:6 through 8. Now Peter was still going to need a little more convincing, but this was Peter's resurrection realization, or we can call it his starter realization. Because Peter wasn't fully, he was convinced and he believed it, but he still was talking himself out of it. You can talk yourself out of deliverance, by the way. The fourth appearance and fifth resurrection realization. Jesus Christ then comes up behind and between two disciples who are walking back home to Emmaus after all that sad, crazy, and amazing events of the last week. They had been there. And some say Emmaus is about 7 miles away, which would be about an hour and a half walk, casual walk. Now, amazingly, these disciples who were friends of the apostles and who knew Jesus, they don't recognize him. They don't recognize him. And remember, they had seen Jesus get crucified. They'd seen him before and after, or during too. And they saw him beat to a pulp. And they may have even heard him sing Psalm 22. They had heard the women tell of seeing an angel who had told them that Jesus rose from the dead. They'd heard this. These two men still didn't get it. Their minds were just cranking things out, trying to figure this out. They didn't yet believe. They didn't yet realize that Jesus actually rose from the dead. They listened to Jesus share from memory. They don't know it's Jesus. Just this guy appears right next to him, steps up between them, puts his arms around their shoulders probably, and then he just starts quoting every place in the Bible that had any reference to the Messiah. Which apparently, if you did it, it's going to take you an hour and a half. That's a lot of talking, folks. That's a lot of memorization. This is the human side of Jesus knew all these scriptures. He knew these before he was crucified. Did you know that? Not just the resurrected Jesus. Imagine the Christ sharing the word with you for over an hour. OMG. Would that be something you'd tweet or put on Facebook? Would you be doing selfies? These guys were blown away. And they didn't even know who this guy was. They didn't recognize him. But just the word burned in them. Just like it does with you. When you understand that truth and things fit together in your mind, it's an amazing thing. And there are also other reasons Jesus took this huge chunk of time out of his busy Resurrection Day schedule. Jesus knew what these guys were capable of doing if he could just get them to believe that he rose from the dead. He knew these guys, or knew of them. They made it to Emmaus. They were still not aware it was Jesus. They asked him to come inside and eat together with them. And Jesus tells them that he's planning on walking just a little bit further. Thanks anyway. And the culture of that time was to refuse an offer twice and then to accept it the third time. That's called constraining. They go, come on and eat with us, Jesus. No. I'm just going to walk a little bit further. I got to stretch out my legs a little bit. A lot of stuff happened over the last few days. They go, come on, you got to eat with us. Okay, I'll come in just for a quick bite. And they all enter the house in Emmaus, and they warm up some pre-cooked bread. And Jesus, the risen Christ, he picked up a large pancake-sized loaf of flatbread, sort of like this. This is a little thicker than it might have been. It's about as big as a plate and about as thick as a man's finger. That's the kind of bread that they ate. You see? And then he tore a piece off of that piece of bread. And this is just a guy they were walking with who knows a lot of the Bible, knew a lot of the scriptures. And I'll bet he repeated the same words that he had said at the Last Supper. And he said, this bread represents my body, which is broken for your healing. Do this in remembrance of me. And at that moment, those men had their resurrection realization while they were eating with Jesus, the resurrected Christ. And then all of a sudden, he just vanishes. And they're like, what? And they're going, what? And they're going, what? And what? And what? You know, I mean, it was crazy. I guess selfies were over at that time. They missed their window. Put away the selfie stick. They wouldn't have had that. They would be too cool for that. So here we are, Luke 24:31 from The Voice. At that instant, two things happen simultaneously. Their eyes are suddenly opened, so they recognize him, and he instantly vanishes, just disappears before their eyes. Two disciples to each other. Amazing! Weren't our hearts on fire within us while he was talking to us on the road? Didn't you feel it all coming clear as he explained the meaning of the Hebrew scriptures? So they get up immediately and rush back to Jerusalem, all 7 miles, where they find the 11 gathered together, the 11 plus a number of others. Remember, Jesus knew these guys. He knew what they were going to do. He knew they were chatty guys, but they had good memories and they were convincing. They dashed back the 7 miles to Jerusalem to tell the apostles who were still in their Airbnb, their bed and breakfast, trying to make sense of what really happened to Jesus. And you can look at that in Luke 24:13 through 35 or John 20:19 through 25. Now, this had been a super important 2 hours for Jesus. Without these men, people may not have ever really gotten it. Just think about the timing. Resurrection's great, necessary, but if people don't realize it and believe in the resurrection, we would not be here today. There would be no Christianity. This was crazy important. And he knew they would run back to Jerusalem and help convince the hard-hearted apostles and disciples that he did, in fact, rise from the dead. Now, the fifth and final appearance and the sixth resurrection realization on Sunday. Jesus now appears to 11 of the 12 apostles. And do you know, who do you think was missing at that point? There's 11 there, one's missing. Was it Judas missing? Did he go out and kill himself at this time? No. It was Thomas who was absent. So if Thomas was absent and there were still 11 apostles there, then who was at this meeting? Judas. Judas, the guy who turned Jesus Christ in, saw the resurrected Christ. Whew. What? 8 days later, Jesus appears a second time to the 11 apostles. See, Jesus appeared at that meeting. Those guys went and convinced him. And then Jesus appeared at that meeting. You see, and then and Thomas wasn't there. That's why they call him Doubting Thomas. He goes, no, and he wasn't there. That wasn't him. You guys are just crazy dudes. I would have to see the holes in his hands and the hole in his side, or I ain't going to believe. Well, now 8 days later, Jesus appears a second time to the 11 apostles. And this time, Doubting Thomas was present, which means who wasn't there this time? Judas had gone off to do the dirty deed. He offed himself. He dove onto a sharp stick. That's how they committed suicide in those days. And sort of like a soldier falling on the sword, he fell on a sharp stick and impaled himself. And Jesus told Thomas to touch the holes in his hands and to thrust his finger into the wound on his side. Now, I'll bet Thomas did it. Imagine, you know, he did it. He did it. He had to do it. And God knows what you really need in order to believe. You think he'll do less for you? My God, we all have tough times in life, but if we just keep moving, that open door has to be there. In Thomas's case, the open wound. You know, this is how Jesus appeared this time, with his wounds showing. Jesus did this just for Thomas. Jesus wasn't in pain now. He was able to shapeshift to help Thomas and others believe. What will he do for you? I think he's still able to do and to be what we need him to be. Now, God says that way back in the Bible, that he will be what we need him to be. What do you need, folks? You need health? It has to be there. You got to figure a way to find it. Prosperity has to be there. Everything you need has to be there. What will he still do to help you believe? He's probably touched all of our lives more times than we realize. And the way we touch his life is by walking by the Spirit, living truth, and maintaining our resurrection realization. I would bet that each of us have seen the resurrected Christ, but we didn't recognize him. Keep your eyes open. More importantly, keep your heart open. Now, the other appearances within that 40-day span. The 11, he appeared to 11 apostles in Galilee. That's 70 miles north. And some of his apostles still don't believe that he actually rose from the dead. Even as they see him standing there in his resurrected body. Matthew 28, 16 and 17 says, some still don't believe. It just baffles me. And I hope that I wouldn't be one of those. I'd like to say I wouldn't, but I don't know. If you can believe that Jesus rose from the dead, you can believe anything, folks. You can believe for that health, that prosperity. And anybody who's a Christian, who's born again, has believed. And you never saw him that you knew of. Now, Peter. Jesus appears to Peter and some of the boys who decide to go back fishing. They decide to go back to their fishing business after that year. And he tells them, stop fishing, guys, and get back to feeding the sheep. And the sheep, what I mean by sheep, is go back to take care of the people I've given to you to take care of. John 21, 1 through 23. And they leave the fishing business for good at this point. And they go back to Jerusalem where he told them to wait. Now 500 people, the 500. Jesus also appears to 500 people on one occurrence. That's 1 Corinthians 15, 4 through 8. Now he appears in that resurrected body to 500 people at one time. I would say it's beginning to go viral here, folks, at least in that day and time. Now the ascension. The ascension, the resurrection is one thing, but the ascension is another. Jesus appears to his disciples again after 40 days on the Mount of Olives. That's near Bethany, near Jerusalem. and they actually see him ascend into heaven. Like those soldiers had seen the angel come down, they saw Jesus ascend, go up. An angel appears in their midst. Now they're standing there gawking, a little bit of spittle coming out, like, what? And all of a sudden, there's somebody standing in the midst of all those guys, an angel, and the angel taps him on the shoulder. Hey, what are you guys looking at? He's coming back. Get to work. Time is short. James. At some point, Jesus appears in his resurrected body to his half-brother named James. And the half-brothers of Jesus finally get it. They finally realize that Jesus is the Christ. And Mary and her boys were hanging with the apostles after the ascension and before the day of Pentecost. We know that. But his brother, his half-brother, finally believed. Didn't his half-brother think he was crazy? Yeah, at one time. They tried to abduct him one time. They thought he was so crazy. How hard would it be to really believe that your big brother was the Christ, the promised Messiah, and he had just been beat to hell and raised from the dead? How hard would that be to believe? Would you have to put down a little jealousy? These weren't dummy guys either. Two of his half-brothers wrote epistles, James and Jude. They're not dummies. God worked in them. How hard would it be? Remember, only a few months ago, they thought Jesus was possessed and crazy. But remember how it says that, even a few weeks back, it says that they didn't believe in the Christ, in Jesus. Just days before this, they didn't. So Jesus appeared sometime during that 40 days to his brother James. What changed? What changed is when he finally realized the resurrection, then everything changed. And the same is true with us. If you can believe in the resurrection, you can believe anything, folks. You can believe for anything too. Realizing the resurrection is what changed everything. James finally got it. James finally had his resurrection realization. Jesus even gave a resurrection appearance to a group of devil spirits. Now, I don't know the timing of this. It's in the Bible. I don't know when. But at some point, Jesus appeared and told of his victory from death to a group of devil spirits who had been restrained from not allowed to function since the flood of Noah. And if the timelines are right, that's about 2,400 years. 2,400 years they've just been stuck in one place. Imagine not being able to work or function or to do anything for 2,400 years. They even realized, and the Bible says they even believed that Jesus had been risen from the dead. Doesn't mean they believed in him. They just believed it happened. The Bible says the devil spirits believe and tremble. James 2:19. Okay, that's James, the half-brother of Jesus, 2:19. His rising up made them realize they were going down, baby. They realized that they have an end, and we realize through the resurrection that we have a future. Finally, a few years pass, and Jesus appears to Paul. And Jesus appears to a man named Paul on the road to Damascus. And Paul was a hunter of Christians, a murderer of God's kids. But Paul changed everything when he had his resurrection realization. Paul changed the way Christianity was done. He, by revelation, molded Christianity into the secret dream that God had held in his mind since the foundation of the world, a dream called the Great Mystery. And while the rest of the apostles mixed legalism with truth and threw in a dash of walking by the Spirit, Paul was all in. He shoved all his chips in. And Paul took Christianity to a whole new level and took it to the world. Paul had his resurrection realization, but through Paul's teaching and example, he has helped billions get born again, live the Word, and even a few of us learn how to walk with a little spiritual power. You see, read Acts 9, Acts 22, 1 Corinthians 15:8. Now, in closing, there's a big difference between a resurrection appearance and an honest realization that Jesus actually rose from the dead and is still alive. Because he rose from the dead, we too will someday rise from the dead. Because Jesus rose from the dead, we can get born again and serve our purpose on earth right now, as well as looking forward to that future and ultimate paradise that God designed for us in the future. Because we too believe he is risen. Let's enjoy our resurrection realization. Now, you go out there and change the world. God bless you all.